And the time came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. I love this quote. I've always loved this quote. I think I first heard it when I was 23. I was about a year out of college, a time that was ripe for blossoming. I just moved into Vermont and into a house with a couple who lived up in the mountains in Richmond. They both had their solid roots in their home and their careers. They were in their 40s. She taught at a community college. He was an engineer or something. And each night, the television remained unplugged as they listened to Vermont Public Radio, debated a social issue, or read the newspaper. They started yawning at about 8 o'clock and were in bed by 9:30. And they were cute. And they did Vermont-y things like go snowshoeing out their back door. And one day they invited me along, and I said yes. I put on many layers, and I strapped on my snowshoes. We let the dogs out the door, and we started up the hill after them. And we went around a corner and up another hill, and up another hill, and up another hill. And I was used to running about 5 miles a day, but I was not used to snowshoeing up mountains. I had thought it would be no problem. I was 23 and they were in their 40s. But at the point where I thought my heart was going to burst out of my chest, I called for a break. And that was when Terry told me that he was actually an ultra-marathon racer. I asked, what is an ultra-marathon? He said, it's a long-distance race. It can vary from 30 to like 100 miles. And some of them go over mountain passes when they're held in Vermont, and some of them take 24 hours. I just laughed, and he didn't. He simply told me, you can tell an ultra racer by what they eat when they're on the path. Marathon people eat energy bars and gel packs, and ultra racers eat candy bars and potato chips. Apparently, this is a real thing. Despite this, I still thought, well, you guys are still old. You're just fit. I couldn't relate to their stability, their accumulation of things, their comfort with their lives, their routine, their early nights. There was a gap between us, and it was this gap that was plaguing me. So one winter night, as we sat at the kitchen table, and we watched their German Shepherd wolf mix dogs go out onto the porch and bed down in the snow, because that's where they were most comfortable. We got our thickly sliced toast from the local bakery and put Nutella on it. And this was kind of a nightly ritual in this house. Some routines are worth maintaining. Well, with some reservation, I joined them at the table, and I decided to talk about what was actually going on in my life. Because I was overwhelmed with the blossoming phase of the freedom I was experiencing being 23 with so many possibilities for my life before me. I could live anywhere in the world. I had just proved that. I moved to California after graduation, and then West Virginia, and finally Vermont. I could find a job that would pave a career path, or I could find a job that would give me travel benefits. And I had tried both. I'd worked at a nonprofit in California, and I worked at a summer camp in West Virginia that took me to Maine and Massachusetts, where I got to go sea kayaking and mountain climbing. So I could move for a job. I could move for a national park, for an experience. I could move for love. I had done each of these. And whatever I chose this next time, I wanted to get it right, to make choices that would help me and not hurt me down the road. I would never be at this junction again. I had no commitments, no assets, no roots tying me down. All I had were options. I was untethered and paralyzed. And I had so many options, I wasn't sure I should actually say this to them because I didn't want to make them feel bad about their lives. You know, they were old, and they were past the point of making any exciting decisions. I know, it's what I thought at the time. And Nancy responded warmly when I said this. I don't know what to do. There's so many possibilities. And she responded warmly, which was reassuring. She said, I remember how exhilarating it was to be in my 20s, with the world and your life stretched out before you. And Terry agreed. And then, without missing a beat, Nancy said, that was exciting, and I'm glad I never have to do that again. And Terry said, yeah, as if it was a no-brainer. And I'm sure I sat straight up and said, wait, what? How could it possibly be better to be in your 40s than in your 20s? What could it have over what I was facing? But Nancy said, being in my early 20s, I had so many options. It was terrifying. It was hard to choose one life path because I knew if I did, I had to let go of all these others. But you have to be willing to give up on other choices if you're going to live into the possibility that's calling to you. She said, I love my life now. I'm good with my decisions. I would hate to have to go back and do that again. Well, now that I'm approaching my 40th this year, I totally get what Nancy and Terry were talking about. There are perks to being 40, almost 40. I love being my age. I don't want to go back. And even at 23, I felt relieved on some level that things would change and it wouldn't always be so overwhelming. Unfortunately, I don't think that's what Nancy said. She didn't say it's going to get easier and not be overwhelming. She said it was different, that she faced different choices now. Perhaps it was the steadiness of their routine that fooled me into thinking something about their life was simple, just because they were older. Life doesn't necessarily get simpler as we age. If we experience our circumstances differently, it's because we ourselves have learned something, have maybe become more familiar with what it takes to have something be and bud and allow it to transform and blossom. Looking back now, I think that's more of what she was saying. But at 23, it was all or nothing, man. It was like, go big or go home. Blossom once and for all time. You will know who you are and claim your place and go into the world. And I thought that was what was going to happen when I moved to California. And I loved big nature. I just was like, I'm going to go explore this. I'm going to find out about city living, and I'm going to know myself, and I will blossom into this new life. Done. What I couldn't admit was that at the same time, as I was blossoming into this new life, I was also a tight bud who was scared of trying to find my way. I was no longer in a school with people all in my own peer group. I had to find a way to go make friends in a social ocean of people of all ages. I didn't do much. I was scared to join clubs or go to meetups. I had made friends with my roommate, but that was about it. I remember coaching myself to just go out. But I remember saying to myself, Erin, it is highly unlikely that you're going to meet a friend by them knocking on your door and coming to you saying, hey, I want to get to know you. You have to leave your house if you want to make friends. But instead, I went out hiking and I explored the wilderness by myself. I was opening in the ways that I could as I remained tight in a bud in other ways until the day came when the pain of remaining that bud and that social isolation was more than the risk it took to blossom and reach out. Even though we may value opening, we can still struggle to do it at times. There are ways we can open and others that we can't. We may open in one direction at the same time as we're losing confidence in another. We may feel the warmth that encourages us to open. We may also feel the warmth of the familiar that calls to us to remain exactly as we are, getting exactly what we already know. Even if it's suffering, at least it's familiar. Both opening and closing can have their merits and their warmth for us. They can attract us at the same time. There is no single choice in life to just decide to open and you're done with it. Each day brings new possibilities, whether we want it to or not. The author of our reading today says, to be human is to be lost in the woods. None of us arrives here with clear directions on how to get from point A to point B, without stumbling into the forest of confusion or catastrophe or wrongdoing. Although the woods are dark and dangerous, it is in the woods that we discover our strengths. We all know people who can say their cancer or divorce or bankruptcy was their greatest gift of a lifetime, that until the body, the heart, or the bank was broken, they didn't know who they were, what they felt, or what they wanted. In their most broken moments, they were brought to their knees, they were humbled, and they were opened. But, she says, we also know people who did not turn their misfortune into insight or their grief into joy. Instead, they became more bitter, more reactive, more cynical. They shut down. They went back to sleep. Blossoming is always done without a roadmap. There are no guarantees what our opening will lead us to. It is risky, yet so is the alternative. Being a people of resistance in a faithful way means we will resist shutting down as life presses in upon us. It means we'll continue to unfurl into the unknowns of our lives without roadmaps, yet navigating by the compass of our hope, our openness to life, choosing to have an orientation that we expect to love. Being a people of resistance means as we meander through our lives, we will do the best we can to respond to the path as it breaks, lifts, whirls, and turns everything upside down, with some measure of authenticity and openness to continue. The author of the reading this morning learned this firsthand as her own life circumstances invited her to blossom. She was scared to make space for it because she feared that it would dismantle her life and her family. To unfurl, she had to first let go of the outcomes and instead be committed to the value and the alchemy of the process of opening. It wasn't easy for her. She traveled halfway around the world before she traveled from her head down into her heart. When we care deeply about the outcomes, it can be hard to let go and open our minds and our hearts to other possibilities. Lester said, when we get out of bed in the morning and we begin again where we left off yesterday, we attack life as if we were waging a campaign of control and survival. All the while, deep within us flows an endless river of pure energy. It sings a low and rich song that hints of joy and liberation and peace. Up on top, as we make our way through life, we may sense the presence of the river. We may feel a subtle longing to connect with it, but we're usually moving too fast, or we're distracted, or we fear disturbing the status quo of our surface, thoughts and feelings. We fear what the soul might have to say about the choices we've made, the habits we formed, the decisions we're avoiding. Perhaps if we quieted down, we would be moved to make a big change. Why should we trust something as indeterminate as a soul? And so instead, we shut down. I have shut down to my soul enough times to know what it feels like when the river is dammed. I know the feeling of deadness. I know how the river diverts itself and breaks through in other ways, as a desire to blame, as an emotion of anger, as physical illness, restlessness, or weariness, self-destruction. The soul always speaks. And sometimes it speaks the loudest when we block its flow, when we only live a half life, when we stay on the surface. She says it can be unsettling to dip below the familiar and to descend into the more mysterious realms of the soul. But this mysterious realm, this is the place where new buds are born, buds that require nourishment if they will achieve their full form. What really comforts me is that Lesser was no stranger to this process. She's one of the founders, the co-founders of the Omega Institute in upstate New York. They are a spiritual retreat center where 20,000 people go every year who are in the midst of some kind of change or transition, and they're trying to find a way to stay open as they're going through some major crisis in their life. People who seek to, probably because they're suffering in some way or another, they want a way out of it that doesn't just lead to more suffering. And so even though she had led workshops and attended them for over 40 years, this was earlier on in her life, she knew the process and was familiar with it, and it was still hard. She still found herself in Jerusalem, resisting this man saying, "Let your heart want what it wants. Let it break open." There is no class we can take, or book we can read, or sermon we can give, or one decision we can make to finally blossom that will lead us to always be in that position. We can only become more familiar with this process, with its experience, more trusting in our own abilities to navigate it, to survive, to make a new way, to recover or course correct if need be, to know that we will be enlivened somehow on the other side. Life has taught me, Erin, you will blossom more than you want, so you might as well get used to it. They can arrive quickly at times, sometimes brutal. But no one blossom stops life from coming. There's no way that we can remain a bud or a flower. To me, the choice isn't so much about finding the right decision as it is about accepting that blossoms only come from buds. This is one of the hardest life lessons. If in my 20s it was learning how to blossom in the first place, now as I approach 40, I feel like the developmental learning that I've had is just accepting this is life and humanity. Just because you know it here doesn't make it easier to walk it when that choice is presented each and every time. I really thought that I would just be done. And there's some part of me that really is nostalgic for that dream that I had, for this sense of stability, that I will know myself and then all the answers are clear. But I have not experienced a graduation, a wedding, a monumental fight, or an assertive proclamation yes that has kept me from having to go through the budding and blossoming process over and over again. And I've found that sometimes that gained experience yields some faith in the process, and sometimes it doesn't. After over a decade of practicing and becoming familiar with opening, I experienced a bout of depression whose length and depth of despair I had never known before. And I had to learn how to say yes and open even to that. There is no grand blossoming that says every single bud that comes along will be easy. And sometimes there's a long time between one bud and the next. But the buds will keep coming. And so I have no grand conclusion for you in this sermon. I can't say to you, here's all you have to do, because there's only life that keeps moving. I did find this one thing, though, I find very comforting. In Lesser's book, she had a quote from Joseph Campbell, who's an author who studied comparative religion and world myths in his own search of understanding the human experience. And he wrote this: "People say that what we're all seeking is the meaning of life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive." Maybe that's the point of budding and blossoming, not to figure it all out, but to truly be alive. And when I drop my own search for answers, and I allow myself to just vitally be here in life's process, with all of my own tightly bound and resistant buds, and my sometimes fragrant, treasure-filled blossoms, this new wave of acceptance washes over my also present discomfort. It can feel insufficient to me to say, I don't know the meaning of it all. I don't know why we're here. I don't know the purpose of my life. Yet I feel like something more honest that I can say is that just experiencing life is valuable in and of itself. We might as well surrender and just experience it. Be gentle with ourselves, that we aren't going to be the people who always blossom, but we're also not going to be the people who stay in the bud. We could just choose to be sweet and gentle with ourselves as we go through it, because after all, maybe just being here for it is what it's all about.